A few years ago, I was driving my car and I came across a train that had jumped its tracks, and of course it just sat there going nowhere. When a train derails off the path it was made to follow, it simply sits there and it's one big mess. Well, in the beginning of time, God laid a track or a path for His creation to follow, and this path led toward a grand and glorious destiny for God's creation. But time and again, human beings have failed to follow God's path for His creation. We've derailed the world and ended up with one big mess. In this series of lessons, we'll be learning about the path that God laid down for His creation in the earliest years of world history, what we often call in Christian circles creation ordinances. And we'll be exploring Genesis chapters 1 through 11, often known as the Primeval history. These chapters of the Bible will help us see the amazing path God wanted the people of Israel to follow under the leadership of Moses. And they'll also show us the path His people should follow even today. We've entitled our first lesson, A Perfect World, because we'll focus our attention on Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 3. The passage where Moses first described how God shaped the world into a perfect order that greatly pleased Him. As we'll see, this ideal world anticipated or foreshadowed the destiny toward which God took Israel in the days of Moses, the same destiny toward which God takes all of His people throughout history. It not only shows us how things were in the beginning, but also how life should be now, and how our world will certainly be at the end of our age. This lesson divides into 4 parts. First, we'll present an overview of the primeval history of Genesis chapter 1 through 11. Second, we'll narrow our focus to Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 through chapter 2 verse 3, looking first at its literary structure. Third, we'll investigate the original meaning of this portion of Genesis in the light of its structure. And fourth, we'll look for the proper modern applications of this passage. Let's begin with an overview of the entire primeval history of Genesis chapters 1 through 11. Our approach to Genesis 1 through 11 may seem a bit unusual at first, so we should explain our basic strategy. At least 3 main ideas will guide our study of this part of the Bible. First, the inspiration of these chapters. Second, the literary background behind these chapters. And third, the purpose for which these chapters were written. In the first place, we're firmly committed to the divine inspiration of all of Scripture, including Genesis chapters 1 through 11. Our evangelical understanding of inspiration reminds us of 2 very important features about this part of the book of Genesis. First, its reliability, and second, its intentional design. We affirm in the strongest terms that this part of the Bible is completely reliable because it's divinely inspired. Now, many historical issues come to the foreground when we study this part of the Bible, and some of these issues have not been fully resolved. But for our purposes, it will suffice to say that divine inspiration implies historical reliability. Moses intended his original readers to receive this portion of Genesis as historically true. Now, just as with all Scripture, we have to interpret these passages carefully so that we don't misunderstand their historical dimensions. Nevertheless, it's clear that other biblical writers, and even Jesus Himself, believed that the stories of Genesis 1 through 11 were trustworthy history. These lessons will build on the belief that these chapters are true and reliable records of what actually happened in ancient times. While we believe that the primeval history is reliable, we must always remember that God inspired Moses to select and arrange the content of these chapters according to a particular design. Think about it this way. Genesis 1 through 11 covers the whole history of the world from the creation to the days of Abraham, who lived about 2000 to 1800 BC. Now, we would all agree that Moses left out many more world events from that period of time than he included in these 11 short chapters. So, to understand Genesis chapters 1 through 11, we must take note of this selectivity as well as of the arrangement of these chapters. As we notice how Moses intentionally designed this primeval history, we'll be able to answer some very important questions. Why did God inspire Moses to include this little information? And why did God have Moses arrange these chosen materials as he did?